Hello, today we're going to convert percentages to decimals. We will use this frequently in this upcoming unit. So we're going to discuss several different ways that we can accomplish this. One of the ways is to use the calculator keys on our scientific calculator, but a calculator would also be very helpful for our first method. One of the ways to convert a percent to a decimal is to drop the percent sign and divide it by 100. So we're going to take 16 divided by 100. So using your calculator would make this much quicker. However, if you don't have your calculator handy, here's how we would do this. The first number goes inside the division box. The second number goes on the outside. So top dog or first dog gets the house or goes in the house. So we can already see that 16 is smaller than 100, and so I can't make a group of 100 if I only have 16. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the decimals. I can't put 100 into 16, or I can't come up with a group of 100 if I only have 16. So I'm going to borrow my decimal buddies, and I'm going to pretend that this is not 16 and 0 hundredths. I'm going to pretend that I'm looking at 160. So I could get one group of 100 if I had 160. I could make one group. So we're going to say one group, and I'm going to take away that one group of 100, and I'm going to have my pretend 60. It's really 6.0, but I'm pretending it's 60. Well, I now want to make another group of 100, but I don't have enough. So I'm going to have to attach another 0 here and drop it down. So now this is, I'm looking at this like it's 600. Well, I can make 6 groups of 100 if I have 600. So I'm going to put a 6 here, and I now have 600, and we're done. So it turns out that if you take 16 divided by 100, you're going to get 0 and 16 hundredths. If I pronounce that correctly, that would make sense. So now let's try that again with our second number. In this case, it's 3%. Again, we get rid of the percent, and we take 3 divided by 100. For the sake of time, I'm going to have you do that on the calculator. And the answer is 0 and 3 hundredths. Our next method is very helpful if we don't have a calculator. In fact, you may have noticed a pattern as we started working with by dividing 100. This is going to help us by using this method. We're going to move the decimal 2 scoops to the left, and this is what it's going to look like. We're going to start once again by eliminating the percent sign because we don't want it. We're trying to make a decimal. So I'm going to write 16. But if I'm supposed to scoop a decimal, I have to know where the decimal is in the number 16. Well, any whole number has a hidden decimal back behind. We just don't write our numbers with decimals at the end if we don't need them. So now it says I'm supposed to scoop 2 scoops to the left. So I'm going to go backward once. I'm going to go to the left again twice. And now my decimal is here. So I'm going to write 0.16. Now if I compare that to what we had in the first method, the only thing I have that's missing is my placement holder, my ones zero, or my 0 in the ones column. So it accomplished the same thing just by doing the shortcut method. So we're going to try that again. We're going to start with 3, and then we want to get rid of percent. So I have the number 3. But I have to have a decimal to scoop. Sometimes they're going to give us a decimal, but when we have whole numbers, we don't usually see the decimal. So we're going to write the decimal in. Now I'm going to take that decimal and I'm going to scoop it 2 places. It always has to be 2 places. And the new decimal point is here. Well, now I see I have an empty loop, so I'm going to fill it in with a 0. I'm going to put 3, and again, we like to have that placement 0. And if I compare it again to what happened when I divided by 100, I get the same. So we're probably going to employ this method frequently. Now one more method, because again, we have a calculator, we can use it. We're going to put the number that they give us. So I'm going to write number. So whatever number we're given, then we're going to press the second key, and then you're going to look for the parenthesis key. It's the key actually above the number 8 on your Texas Instruments Scientific Calculator, and above that you're going to see, oh, there's a percent sign. So that second key will get us to that percent sign, and if we press equals, the calculator is going to turn our percent into a decimal. So what you'll see on your calculator face is you'll see 16%, and when you press equals in the corner, it's going to give you 0 and 1600ths. So if we tried the same thing with 3, if you put 3 in the calculator, press the second key, and then that parenthesis, you're going to immediately see that 3% in your calculator. When you press enter, it's going to give you in the corner 0 and 300ths. So please figure out which method you think is your favorite, and that's what I'd like you to use for problem 1 through 12. So I'd like you to pause the video now and try 1 through 12, and then start the video back up to check the answers when you're done. Okay, please let's take a moment to go over the answers for 1 through 6. The first few were very similar to what we did. 1 through 3 were similar, but when we started at 4, this was a little bit different. This is a percent over 100, and so we ended up with a whole number, 1, in that place. We could also write it with the 0, but the calculator would give us this answer, and we don't necessarily need the 0 at the end. This time, this is the first time we've seen a decimal within a percent, and because we had to scoop it back twice, we can't let go of that digit. It had to stay as part of that because it represents all the numbers we see. And then finally this one, this was unusual. Again, we had a decimal in our percent. We had to scoop the decimal, if you use that method, back twice. So we needed a placeholder 0, and again, we have to account for all the digits. We could drop this digit off because it was a 0, but we have to account for all the non-zero digits. So please go on to 7 through 12. All right, let's go through 7 through 12. 7, when we scoop the decimal, the hidden decimal, back twice, it ends up here. So we really, again, don't have to show that 0, but we could. 0 and 6/10 is the same thing as 0 and 60/100. They mean the same thing in math, but we don't necessarily need the 0 at the end. Now, the next series get a little bit tricky. If I show you using the scooping method, it might make a little bit more sense. If I scoop once underneath this 0, that accounts for this 0, and another scoop, I have to put a fill-in 0, but my decimal ends up here. So this 0 is actually a placement 0. So it looks like there might be too many zeros, and that's because we're seeing that placement 0 as well. So number 9, again, I'm going to scoop once backwards, twice backwards, and so if I look at that, I have 1, 2, 3 zeros after the decimal, and then this 0 is a placement 0. We're just putting it in the ones column. So 10 was not that challenging, and hopefully 11 wasn't too bad. Again, if we scoop it back twice, we still have to account for all of those numbers, and there's our placement 0. Those placement zeros are really tricky when we have a lot of other zeros in our decimal anyway, or in our percent anyway. And then finally the last one, if we scoop it back twice, we have a 0 after the decimal, and then we have our placement 0. So if you have not used the scooping method, because we're going to use that frequently, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and try the scooping method if you haven't already. So if this wasn't your chosen method, I want to recall 2 scoops. So we start by looking at that percent. We want to get rid of it, and we're going to write this as 75 without the percent and acknowledge that the decimal is back behind. Then we're going to scoop to the left twice, and now the decimal is here. We're going to put that decimal, and then we want to conclude a placement 0 out in front. If we don't, sometimes that little decimal point gets lost. So we're going to try this again. We're going to start by getting rid of the percent. We're going to write the number, and oh, well, this is nice. The decimal's already there for us. So we are going to scoop it once, twice to the left. Now the decimal's here in front. I have to count for all the digits, and again, I want my placement 0. And our last number is 1, so we're going to start by getting rid of the percent. This one doesn't have a decimal, so I have to acknowledge that all whole numbers have a decimal back behind. Now comes my scoops. 1, 2. My decimal is now there, and this time I need to include a 0 for the scoop that's empty, and then I'm going to need my placement 0 out in front, holding up the place value for the ones column. So this is going to be our preferred method moving forward, just because it's quicker than the other 2 methods. However, that doesn't mean you can't use your calculator to check. So finally, today we're going to convert decimals to percents. And during this unit, you might need to convert a decimal to a percent. In this case, we can scoop the decimal. You may have guessed it, 2 scoops, but this time it's to the right. If we go from a percent to a decimal, we go to the left, and if we go from a decimal to a percent, we go to the right. Now we could also multiply by 100. If you recall, we divided by 100, but since we're doing the opposite, we're going to multiply by 100. So let's use the shortcut method. Let's try that. So we're going to take that decimal and scoop it once, twice, and now it's at the end. So do I really need the 0 if the decimal is here? I do not, so we don't have to show it. And in fact, do I really need to show a decimal if I have a whole number? I do not. But I do need to show, since we're trying to make it a percent, I need to show the percent sign. So let's try that again. We're going to take the decimal and we're going to scoop it once and twice, since we're trying to make it a percent. Well, this time we have an empty loop, so we're going to put that placement 0 in there. So this is what I have. Well, I don't really want this 0 in front. I don't need it. But I do need the 0 that's behind the 9 because it comes before the decimal. And I actually don't need the decimal because we're trying to make this into a percent. And 90 is a whole number. So let's try our last. We're going to scoop once. We're going to scoop twice. Oh, but this time the decimal is trapped between 2 numbers. So I have to keep the decimal. The decimal has to stay, but I don't have to keep these 2 zeros in front. So this would be 8 and 5/10%. Sometimes the decimal doesn't scoop past and make a whole number. It still has digits behind it. So hope this was helpful and you have a great afternoon.